Ryan, and we're really, really delighted that we, for the first time in Ireland, have got our first national recovery framework, which will be published in the next couple of weeks. Michael. Michael. There you go.
Thank you. Ooh, sit. Good morning, everybody. Stuff. It's good to be here, as St. Peter once said. And I'm very glad that this is in Sligo today, because this time of year is very painful for Mayo people when they have to go to Dublin. And I probably wouldn't have made it onto the stage anyway. I'd been wrestled to the ground before I got here. But it's great to be here, and it's great to see so many people, and wow, that there is a huge amount of people here. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is the National Recovery Framework for mental health services in Ireland. And what is the National Recovery Framework? So it's a framework for mental health service providers to support the delivery of a quality, person-centred service. And it's going to be from 2018 to 2020, and really it's trying to bring together in a strategic way everything that we've been talking about this morning. And I suppose some of the questions that we hear about recovery are, well, what does it mean? It's a nice idea, but how do we implement it, and so on. And it was great to hear Marina talking about what it can mean in a clinical setting. And I suppose what we want to do is through the framework we want to give an understanding of what recovery is and a recovery orientated service. And the point has been made a few times here this morning already about we're not experts in anything. We know what we know at this point in time, and we don't know what we don't know. And so we're not talking about defining recovery, because that's best left to the individual themselves. But we do know that there is a process that can support somebody in recovering. And that's what we're trying to do through the framework, is to say this is what we think it is, and this is how we think we do it. And I suppose one of the key things that's different about the framework that I think is very important is that we're talking about including actions and measures that will support its implementation. So we're going to say, okay, this is what we think a recovery-orientated service should look like, and this is how we're going to measure it. And we have an organisational commitment from the National Division to say we will measure it. And why do we need a National Recovery Framework? Marina and Teresa have already talked about vision for change. And a lot of progress has been made. The fact that we're standing here in this building, it's now a hotel, no longer a hospital. We have ARI, we have peer support, we have Office of Mental Health Engagement, we have recovery education. A lot of things are happening. Sometimes we're so close to the wood we can't see the trees, but a lot has been achieved. When I look around here today, I remember being in a room with 3 people, not 20 in Castlebar, thinking about, wouldn't it be a great idea to bring this somehow to everybody. So huge things have been achieved. However, there remains a variance in what we understand by recovery, in the commitment to it, and in the resourcing of it. And this has been recognised by the Anne O'Connor and the National Mental Health Division. And the development of the framework is an attempt to ensure that we get a consistent, equitable and good quality approach to recovery across all CHOs, so that a service user in Castlebar can get the same quality service as they would in Tala or in Kinmare or in Gweedore or wherever it is. That geography should not dictate what kind of service you get. So how was the framework developed? And the development of the National Recovery Framework was identified as a key priority for the National Mental Health Division. And they have a process now that I won't bore you with, but it was signed off by a function that's called the Change Board. And it was designated as a key project for the Performance Management Office, which I now work for. And a steering group was set up to oversee the development of the framework, which Charlie Meehan, who's with us today, is a member of. And the process was, we undertook a literature review. We looked at the best practice in recovery. We looked at similar documents throughout the world. We engaged through Charlie with all services to say, what are you doing? What kind of documentation have you got? And based on that, and we worked with the recovery consultants, otherwise known as the ARI recovery consultants, to draft the principles and framework content. And that went out to a consultation process. And based on that consultation, the framework was then revised. And last Monday week, the National Mental Health Management Team signed off on the framework. So from 2018 to 2020, we will have a National Recovery Framework for Irish mental health services. And on the right-hand side of the screen there, you see some of the people who were involved in developing the framework. And it's currently with NALA to try and get the plain English stamp. And I suppose one of the things that in the development of the framework that was important was to try and to illustrate the point, the importance of co-production and how it would work. So that's where we try to involve as many people as possible. Moving on to what the framework itself is about. Well, so we're trying to give an understanding of recovery. But if somebody asks me today, you know, what is recovery, Michael? I think the best answer I could give is to say to them, go and ask, you know, the service user that you're talking to now are going to meet, because you know, it's about the person in their life and what they want to achieve in their life. And this is one of the ways recovery is referenced in the framework, and it says that it's intrinsically about people experiencing and living with mental health issues in their lives and the personal goals they want to achieve in life, regardless of the presence or severity of those mental health issues. And what is the role of a service provider? What do we mean by a recovery-orientated service? A recovery-orientated service is built on a culture of hope and expectation that the person can recover from their mental health challenges and build a fulfilling life of their own choosing. The role of the service provider is one which empowers and facilitates the process of an individual's self-determined recovery. So the role of a service provider is moving to that as one of an enabler. So it is enabling me or anybody else to achieve, you know, the recovery goals that I want in my life. And we talk a lot about hope, and hope is very, very important. But we're moving now to a place beyond hope, and that's a place of expectation. And we want people to have an expectation that when they come into mental health services, that they can recover and that life can get better. And not only do we want that for family members and service users, but we want that for mental health professionals, that they too have that expectation that the service I work in will help people recover, that people coming into this service, I will not be seeing them for the next 20 years, that recovery will be possible. Excuse me.
What would happen if I spilled the water, Catherine?
Probably everything would blow up. Don't spill the water.
I'll try not. So the four core principles that we are saying are intrinsic to a recovery-orientated service. When we started off, there was about 16, and so they've been funneled down now to 4. And as I said, I'm not saying this is definitively what it's about. All I'm saying is at this point in time, this is what we know and this is what we think. And the first one talks about the centrality of the service user lived experience. So the second one is the co-production of recovery promoting services between all stakeholders. And the third one is an organisational commitment to the development of recovery-orientated mental health services. And the fourth one, supporting recovery-orientated learning and recovery-orientated practice across all stakeholder groups. So when we're talking about the centrality of lived experience, what are we trying to say? We're trying to say that service users, family members and carers have a unique insight from their experience and recovery from mental health conditions. And that brings an increased therapeutic value. It fosters hope and inspires recovery. It creates empathy. It supports service improvement. It empowers people. And it can be used to provide recovery supporting roles within services. When we talk about co-production, what do we mean? And co-production recognises that recovery, is a very big concept. It touches every area of somebody's life. So it's unfair to ask one person to be able to provide answers for every part of their life. And in co-production, we recognise that clinical supports are just one part of an individual's recovery. And sustained recovery involves a wide range of community and other supports such as housing, employment and social integration. And to provide that kind of recovery for people, we need people with expertise in all those areas. And co-production takes a strengths-based approach to each person. It recognises that each stakeholder can bring a unique expertise that makes the whole process better, and that we all practice in that parity of esteem. And it increases the capacity for services to deliver better recovery outcomes. And what does co-production look like in practice? Well, we've tried to break it down into 3 levels, if you like. So it's co-production between the individual and their clinical team. It's co-production between the individual and their natural and community supports. And it's co-production at an organisational level between departments and services and organisations. Principle 3. An organisational commitment to the development of recovery-orientated mental health services. And this in some ways is the most important principle, because Gina will tell you, Catherine will tell you from their experience in ARI that if you don't have an organisational commitment, you may as well go home. And that has been our experience from my time in ARI and from the guys' time now. That is the key thing, that there's a strategic support and resourcing of recovery. So in a recovery-focused mental health service, the organisation is committed to a strategic approach to bring about the cultural and structural changes that are required at both organisation and service level to make them more recovery-orientated. And what does that involve? It's about creating a recovery culture. It's about working and fostering a co-production mentality. It's about communicating recovery. Recovery happens in relations and in relationships. It's about evaluating recovery, seeing what we're doing and are we doing it well, and what more do we need to do. The fourth principle talks about supporting recovery-orientated learning and recovery-orientated practice across all stakeholder groups. And I suppose this is the mistake that has been made many times in trying to develop recovery-orientated services. And there's a lot of excellent papers and excellent initiatives on recovery, but they didn't work. And the reason they didn't work was because people were given a policy or something and say, off you go, now implement it. People need to be supported in the way they practice recovery. And when I say practice recovery, I'm not talking just about staff, I'm talking about service users, family members, everybody who's involved. We all have to be educated in our role. And recovery education has been, Aisling is around here somewhere, and she's leading on writing a briefing paper on what we mean by recovery education. And this is what we have, half the definition anyway that we came up with. And it says it's a process by which individuals explore, assimilate, and create the knowledge required for recovery to occur in their own lives or in the lives of those they support or provide services to, and the communities that sustain them. And I suppose one of the times, sometimes people talk about, well, we don't get recovery, or I don't understand it. And the reason I think that people sometimes don't understand recovery is because they try to understand it with their heads, and they try to understand it intellectually. And if you want to understand recovery, you have to start with your heart, and you have to try and think, if this was me, what would I want to do? What would I want to achieve in my life? How would I want to be treated? What would I want to know about this service, this drug, whatever it is? And I suppose recovery education tries to provide that space. So it's a safe place where people can come together and say, okay, what do we think recovery is? What does it mean for me? How can I articulate it? How can I practice it? And how can I own it? And then when we're talking about recovery promoting clinical practice, and just to say one thing, that good recovery promoting clinical practice also involves clinical excellence. And Marina talked about recovery is not anti-psychiatry. Recovery is not anti-anything. Recovery is pro getting well, and whatever it requires for any individual to get well and to build the life that they want. So we want mental health staff to practice in a way that is guided by the recovery ethos, utilising person-centred and recovery-focused competencies which support the recovery objectives of their service users. Professionals should practice to the highest standard of their own profession, incorporating appropriate clinical supervision and reflective practice. And this should be aligned with all the statutory requirements for Irish mental health services. So we're not asking anybody to step out on a limb. We're talking about evidence-based practice, and as we've heard from Marina, recovery is evidence-based. So I'm going to skip that one because I'm sure we're running out of time. And it's the most important thing about the framework is that we have that organisational commitment that says we want to see recovery implemented and we want to see it measured. And the framework contains 16 actions that it recommends to support the development of a recovery-orientated service. And with those actions are 24 measures. And they are talking about things like, can you demonstrate that you have service user and family member involvement in co-production, in every aspect of service design and delivery? Is peer support readily available? So one of the actions actually states, that every service user should have access to peer support. And the National Mental Health Office are saying that we will measure that. We want to see that happening. So in 5 years, that is an incredible transition. Is recovery education available to everybody? Are staff getting recovery training programs? So many of you are familiar with the program that ARI have developed, the Recovery Principles and Practice Workshops, which provides that kind of safe space for people to begin to exploring what recovery is and what it might mean in their practice. So that is now a national priority. So over the next couple of years, we hope that every member of staff in Irish Mental Health Services will receive that training. And that will be one of the things that's monitored through the framework. How will the framework be implemented? There will be an implementation plan. Each CHO will be asked to come up with a plan to say, this is how we are going to implement the framework in our service. It will be included in the National Division's performance and monitoring process. And it will be reviewed. It's only a 2-year programme. In 2020, the National Recovery Framework will be reviewed. And that's a great, I suppose, relief mightn't be the right word, but because Marina talked about, there are no experts. I'm not here as an expert. I know a little bit about recovery because I've been involved in it for a few years. But the biggest thing I learned was that to do this work, you need to be humble, because I'm not the expert and there are no experts. And the National Recovery Framework is not the definitive panacea to every problem in the Irish Mental Health Service. At this time, based on what we've done, this is what we think will work. It may or may not. So in 2 years' time, we will probably say we will maybe change it completely. 5 years ago, we would have wrote it differently, and in 5 years' time, we will write it differently again. And as Catherine said, the challenge is for all of us. We have to remain teachable. We have to remain open. Things are changing. The service is evolving. Roles will change as people and services become more recovery orientated. So thank you very much for your time.